Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. Thank you so much for joining me today. In this video, I'm sharing die-cut Halloween cards with interference ink using the new Classic Mouse Costume Party collection from Spellbinders. The first die set here is Classic Mouse Costume, and that can be used with the Classic Mouse Wedding die set. The next one is the Classic Mouse Trick or Treat. That one is a companion for any of the Classic Mouse sets. I will be using both of them with the Classic Mouse Wedding, but just know that this first one here, the Classic Mouse Costume, is only a companion for the Classic Mouse Wedding. You need the base dies to create the classic mouse in either him or her for those costumes. The other one, the Classic Mouse Trick or Treat, can be used with any of the Classic Mouse. It can be used with the Steamboat Willie, the Graduation die set, the Classic Mouse Wedding, as well as the Classic Mouse Love dies. So if you have any of those companion dies to go with it, you can pick and choose which pieces you want to go with. And like I said, the Classic Mouse Costume can only be used with the Classic Mouse Wedding. So I've die cut all of my pieces off screen, and for the base Classic Mouse, I have them die cut out of Raven and Classic White cardstock, as well as Poppy cardstock for the little tongue piece. For the costume, I have the gray pieces die cut out of Anchor cardstock, and I'm inking them with some Regal Gray interference ink. This ink is gray, but it has a purple interference with it. If you were to do it on a black cardstock, you would only see the purple. On white or light cardstock, you'll see the gray with the purple shimmer to it. For the purple pieces, these are die cut out of violet cardstock, and I'm using crushed velvet interference ink for inking that. Those are purple ink with a gold shimmer to it. My pumpkin is die cut out of carrot cardstock, and I'll be using some pumpkin spice interference ink for inking that. So we're going to get the orange color on the orange cardstock, but we're going to see a little bit of that purple shimmer, and it just takes the die cuts to the next level. I just love the shimmer to them. I have a whole playlist with interference inks if you're looking for more inspiration with them. I've used them in many videos. For my green pieces here, they're die cut out of Rainforest Cardstock, and I'm using Magic Garden for inking them. So you'll see the green ink, but when we tilt it into the light, we're going to see that purple bit of shimmer. I always love finding different ways to add different textures to die cut cards just to take them to the next level. And there's a lot of detail in these pieces because we have a whole lot of pieces put together to create the characters, but the shimmer just gives you something for your eye that draws your eye. And between using the shimmer and then different types of specialty cardstock, I just think it takes them or makes them really interesting, shall we say. For my pumpkin, I have the base die cut out of some Raven cardstock, and I'm going to glue those two pieces together. I like to use some liquid glue in a fine line bottle, so it works well for small die cuts. It also works really well for larger die cuts. For some of the really tiny ones, I'll put the glue on the base piece and then add the tiny die cut over top of it. When you die cut with these dies, there will often be little indents left to show you where the upper layers are intended to go, so it makes it really easy to know exactly where to put the glue. Once I've layered these costume pieces, I'll set them to the side and assemble my base pieces. So here are the pieces for the base of the Classic Mouse. We also have the little bunny. I'm going to put the bunny in the top hat. The bunny is from, it's either the costume die or the Trick or Treat die. I don't remember at the top of my head, and I don't have the die at the moment. It is die cut out of velvet cardstock, so it has some fuzz to it, so it adds a different texture to it. Now these die sets have a lot of pieces to them, which can make them overwhelming. What I like to do is lay them all out so I know exactly where everything goes. I know where all of the pieces are. They're close to where they're intended to go on the base pieces, and it just makes it a little bit easier because as you're layering those pieces, there's less and less pieces to go as well. And I find that takes some of the intimidation out of it. Now, because these pieces have so many different layers to them, that also means they have so much detail to them. So the final result, in my opinion, has much more wow factor when you've got die sets that have a ton of pieces. By using that liquid glue, I can move and shimmy things in place. And you can see that I sometimes get glue on my fingers and it likes to stick to some of those die cuts. It's easy enough to wipe off. I typically will have a damp microfiber cloth close by, and I'll just use that to clean off my fingers or clean off ink from after inking on my sticky mat. For my little bunny there, I'm just putting glue on the back of those eyes, the nose, and the ear pieces, and then just pressing them onto the pieces that go underneath. It's kind of it just makes it the easiest. Then I put it into that top hat, and there's also tiny little die cuts for the little bunny paws. So we put those on top of those as well. Now with that velvet cardstock, it does take a little bit longer for it to dry because that glue kind of needs to seep into the velvet and then it starts to set. So you do want to be a little bit more patient with that. This back piece here goes behind the Classic Mouse for the back of his jacket. So I put the arms in there first and then put the jacket. The other great thing about using a liquid glue is if you happen to do things out of order, you have that little bit of forgiveness in order to fix it or adjust things. So when I'm doing these arms here, I'm not exactly sure exactly how they get positioned, but because we have that liquid glue, I have the time to assemble more pieces on top and then just adjust the positioning if I need it. I can also put things underneath there. I didn't put the vest on before putting the arms and the back of the jacket on, so I can easily add that in there. So it gives you a little bit of forgiveness. You don't need to have everything set perfectly, which personally I like because I regularly make mistakes when I'm creating. So once we have all of these pieces together, I will set them to the side and then we will work on our background. Now, because there's so much detail in these characters, in my opinion, we don't need anything super fancy or super busy for that background. So I do tend to keep it fairly simple and just do an embossed background for these ones. So once we have the main character done, I can put the cape and the top part of the cape on there. And that just goes behind him and his little suit here. And there were so many different costumes in that Classic Mouse Costume die set. I really had a hard time deciding which one I wanted to do, but I just really loved that cape and thought it would be adorable using it with some interference inks. So our little classic mouse is done. I'm going to set him to the side to completely dry. And I'm just using a Damask embossing folder for the background. I just really love this back embossing folder. Well, really for a lot of things, but I really like it for Halloween themed items. It just seems to be perfect for it. Use that background as is and not add anything to it. I thought I would use the Regal Gray interference ink and just swipe it on the top. So it just brings out that pattern a little bit and ties in the interference inks with the interference inks on the die cuts. For some of the areas with that interference ink, you'll see the gray ink. For the areas that it's heavier, you'll see a little bit more of that purple interference. So I just love the look of those interference just lightly brushed on top there. For my sentiments, I'm using the Spooky Sentiments press plate and die set. This came out this month with the Simon Hurley collection, and I really like the font as well as the simple Halloween sentiments, so I thought it would work well with this collection as well. I'm just going to put them on some hammer mill cardstock and I'm going to heat emboss them with some black embossing powder. I typically love heat embossing my sentiments because it just adds that extra little bit of texture and gives the sentiments a little bit more presence. So I put a little bit of embossing powder tool on my cardstock. I inked up my press plate with some Versamark ink. Now I can run it through my die cutting machine in order to press those sentiments in place, and then I'll add the embossing powder. And when I emboss pressed sentiments as well as stamped sentiments, I typically will use superfine embossing powder when it's available. I just find it gives a little bit of extra detail. If you ever have the opportunity, do one sentiment with superfine and then one with regular, and you'll know exactly what I mean. It just is a little bit finer. It has a little bit more detail to it, and I just think the results are a little bit better. If you don't have superfine embossing powder, you can just use regular embossing powder. It totally works fine, but if it's possible, I think the superfine just has a nicer result to it. So once I've poured that embossing powder off and tapped the excess off, I'm using my heat tool to melt that powder. Now I'm creating 2 cards in this video, so I have more sentiments than I really need here. I'm going to save those sentiments in that package with that press plate and die set. I'll use them for future cards. Next time I come and use this set or pull this set out, I may already have a sentiment done that is going to work for the project that I'm creating. I do tape my die in place using a little bit of Best Ever Craft tape so that that die does not move and shift on me while I'm die cutting it. There's nothing more disappointing than creating sentiments and having that die shift on you so that it's not perfectly aligned. So by taping it in place, I can make sure that it doesn't move on me. Once I have that taped in place, I run it through my Platinum 6 machine, and then I will have sentiments ready for this card as well as the next one I'm creating. So I'll set those aside and get ready to assemble my first card. So I have some Raven cardstock here that I've trimmed to 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches. I'm putting it on my A2 card base. For my emboss piece, I trimmed that down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches so that we see enough of that black mat around it. When I'm putting the glue on there, I'm making sure to put a decent amount of glue on the recessed areas that are going to have contact with that Raven cardstock. I want to make sure that my emboss piece stays in place. Then we can add glue to the back of our classic mouse. And again, I'm generous with that glue. I want to make sure that it has good contact with those raised pieces from our embossed background. I chose one of the sentiments from that press plate and die set. And then lastly, we can add our pumpkin here. That pumpkin is from that Trick or Treat die set. I just thought a pop of orange would, kind of liven up the card itself. Now you can see that the background has some pattern to it because of that interference ink. If you don't necessarily like to see that pattern in the background, you can eliminate putting that interference ink on top of the embossed surface, but I do think it ties everything together with that interference ink on there, as well as inked on the suit of our little classic mouse. The last step I did here was add some glossy accents on top of the pumpkin to give it some glossy dome dimension. It just adds a different texture to the front of the card as well. When you first put that glossy accents on, it has a milky finish to it, but it dries completely clear. So that milkiness goes away as it's drying. So I set that aside to dry while I'm working on our next card. So I used some violet cardstock for the witch hat and dress, and I'm using some crushed velvet interference ink to ink around those pieces. And you can see that you don't see much of the purple ink, but you do see that beautiful gold shimmer around the edges. And again, it just takes the die cuts to the next level, and I just love the final look of it. For the green pieces, I'm using the Magic Garden interference ink. So this one, we're not going to see much of the green ink. We'll see a little bit because that cardstock is lighter than the green ink, but we're also getting some purple interference shimmer on the edges of that. And again, I just think it takes that die cut to the next level. It catches your eye and just gives it a different finish from just regular cardstock. So I'm going to glue some of these pieces in place, and then we'll set them aside to dry while I'm working on the base pieces of our classic mouse. In between different inkings on my sticky mat, I do use my damp microfiber cloth, and I completely clean that off so that it can be drying while I'm assembling something. And next time I need to use that sticky mat, I know it's nice and clean. I'm using the same glue for gluing all of these pieces together. And you can see that by laying everything out, it makes it nice and easy to know exactly which pieces go next when you're assembling. There's not really a right or wrong order for this. When I'm putting characters like these together, sometimes I'll go top to bottom, sometimes I'll go bottom to top. It just really depends on my mood of that day. So because we're using that liquid glue, we also have that little bit of wiggle room that if by chance I go out of order, I can lift something up and tuck something underneath. And I do really like being able to have that bit of forgiveness there, because I will regularly make mistakes. I'll get a little bit ahead of myself or be thinking of something completely different and not really paying attention to what I'm doing. So by having that liquid glue, I can easily fix my mistakes if I do them. For the tiny pieces here, I find that using the handy tool set with that wax tip makes it really easy to layer those tiny pieces on top of each other by just putting the glue on the base piece and then just lifting the tiny pieces and adding them to the top. Now I've already addressed the intimidation of assembling these pieces, but sometimes they're a little bit intimidating to die cut them as well. What I typically will do is put all of the different cardstock colors that I want to create without, and I will pick and choose each die and lay it on top of that cardstock color so that I have all of the die cuts or all of the dies that I want to die cut out of Raven cardstock right on top of my Raven cardstock. So it makes it really easy for die cutting. I'm just die cutting them all at once, and I know exactly which pieces go where. That way it takes a little bit less time for that die cutting by assembling them or by organizing them ahead of time and then just doing that die cutting at once. I'll put them into my craft stack so that they're all ready to go when I do want to create with them, rather than just doing one individual die at a time and doing just the die cutting for just that piece. By organizing them ahead of the die cutting, especially for something like this where there is a lot of dies, again, it just makes it a little bit easier. So once we have the base dies assembled, I can add the little cape on her as well as her little witch's hat. I just love that hat on her. I think it just looks adorable, and I really love that pink or the purple and the green together. I think it's just a fun combination for Halloween. So once she is together and assembled, we can set her off to the side and create our background. Now I'm going to do the same background as the first card because I just really liked it. I just thought it was simple enough that it didn't detract from our classic mice, but it had enough interest to it that it was a good support background for it. Again, if you think it's too busy with that ink on top, you can easily eliminate that ink. You could also use a colored cardstock here. I didn't want to take too much attention away from the colors on the classic mouse, so I opted to keep it fairly neutral in the background. But if you prefer something brighter, that is an easy thing to change. So once I have our background inked, and I did ink that after trimming that down to 3 3/4 inches by 5 inches, I have my same Raven piece for the mat for here. This would be great to use that Rainforest or that Violet as the mat as well if you wanted to add a little pop of color, but because the classic mice are black and white, it does suit them to have the black just to have just a kind of a basic color for that mat, but you obviously you can change that up. Next, I'm going to glue on our little witch mouse here, and then I'm going to give her a cauldron. I have that cauldron die cut out of some silver mirror cardstock, again for a little bit of a different finish. I chose one of the sentiments from that Spooky Sentiments press plate and die set. Now I chose to do heat emboss sentiments, but you could also do foiled sentiments if you wanted to add the foil to the sentiment and have that in a different texture as well. That would be fantastic. Now I thought it would be fun to have a potion in her cauldron there, and I thought it would be fun if that potion glowed. So I'm putting some stickles down first. We're not going to really see much of the glitter from the stickles, but it's just a little bit thicker than my liquid glue. I put some glow-in-the-dark embossing powder on top of that, let it dry for a while, and then tapped off the excess. Now in the light here, you're not going to be able to see the glow really well. I will take a picture of it in the dark and just insert a photo so you can see. But here my crafting, this is during the day and it's a fairly bright day, so you can't see the glow, but there is a picture of it. And of course in the picture, I did it at midnight. You can't see the details of the card, but you can see how much that potion glows there. It's just a fun little surprise element. You could easily just use just the stickles in a color or as is if you wanted, if you didn't necessarily want it to glow in the dark, but it's just a fun surprise little feature of there. Then we have our very first card there with the little magician classic mouse with the bunny in the hat, as well as our pumpkin with the glossy accents on it, giving it a little bit of a different texture. You'll find everything that I've used listed and linked down in the description box below. I absolutely love that we have little Halloween costumes for these classic mice. I think it looks absolutely adorable on them. Thank you so much for joining me today. I really appreciate all the time that you spend with me. I hope you have a fantastic day.